So how do I know if I'm being productive? I think the first thing that we have to do is define what productivity is and how we measure it. So it's actually going to be a pretty fortunate thing if you work for a company and they do it for you, or it may be a curse. But for a lot of us, even if you work for a company, and especially if you work for yourself, we're going to have to define what productivity means to us. And I think we have to do this in an objective way. So I'll just use myself as an example. For me, I set goals for a very long period of time, so years out, life goals, but I also have medium-term goals, yearly goals, quarterly goals. I have weekly goals, daily goals. Now, I'm not saying that you necessarily have to be as aggro as I am on setting all these goals, but I do think that you have to be specific and you have to write it down. So let's just talk about something that we all have to do, and that is we have to get stuff done every day. So my suggestion would be you be specific about what you're going to accomplish today, what your objectives are, and you write it down. And you write it down in a way where there's no ambiguity about whether you got it done or you didn't. So an example of something that would be ambiguous would be, I'm going to get started on this project, as opposed to breaking that project down into some discrete steps and saying, I'm going to organize a meeting with so-and-so, and I'm going to read 2 chapters of this book on this topic, etc. You get the idea. I found something that I've picked up from reading about the Navy SEALs really, really helpful. And there's a great book that I read. It's called The Navy SEAL Art of War. And in that book, they talk about the idea that most of us set limits on what our goals are. And as a result, you kind of underperform or cap your productivity. The Navy SEALs don't do this. They have a limitless attitude. And what they mean by that is that they don't set a goal as a ceiling. Rather, they view their objectives as floors. So let me give you a concrete example. The example that they gave in the book is that if you ask a Navy SEAL how many push-ups they could do, according to the book, they would say, well, I can do a minimum of 50. And they would just get on the ground and do 50, work as hard as they possibly can. And 50 is a minimum, and they will, once they get to 50, they just blow past it. They keep going basically until their arms blow up. And the difference is that they don't view 50 push-ups as a target. They view that as a minimum, and they're always trying to push past it. Okay, so let me go back to something that's more practical. I'm going to give you a few practical tips, and I'm going to give you 6 specific tips on how you can improve your productivity. And I think this will also have the added benefit of you getting really clear about how productive you currently are. So my first tip is that you should get really clear about what you're doing. As I mentioned before, you should be specific. You should write it down on a piece of paper or on a to-do list or whatever system you use. Secondly, I think it's critically important that not only that you talk about and admit to yourself what you're going to do, you be totally honest about why you're doing it. And if you don't know why you're doing it, you shouldn't be surprised that when the going gets tough, you quit, because you may not know the objective and what some people call the pay value of working so hard is. So always know why you're working so hard. And when the going gets tough, remind yourself and link the two and say, look, I'm doing X because I badly want Y. And that'll help a lot. The third thing is this Navy SEAL ethos, and that is decide that whatever you set out to do, these are not targets, these are floors. Fourthly, I think it's critically important that you plan your day to confirm that whatever you do, that minimum that you set out for yourself, that you look at your calendar and be really honest about whether what you're planning is possible, just given the time that you have and given how long it takes to do whatever you're going to take. And I would advise that you add a margin of safety, because we tend to underestimate how long things will take to do, especially new things. Number 5, when you're executing, I'd suggest that you stay on target. So in the modern workplace, I think one of the biggest distractions is email. Another one is Slack, meetings, people coming by. And I think that you just have to find a way to shield yourself from those things. And if you don't have control over meetings and things like that, then what you do have control over is what you bite off and what your floor is. And there's no shame in reducing the floor. The key thing is being realistic and then always going above and beyond. And I think the last thing that I would recommend is that you, at the end of the day, or once you've accomplished your goal, you should reward yourself. And I have to admit, I'm not always good at this myself. I need to celebrate more. And celebrating and rewarding yourself doesn't mean necessarily you have to go out and buy something super expensive for yourself. It could mean, having a nice meal. It could mean even just giving yourself a pat on the back. I think that often, in my experience, I can be my own worst enemy. And I think that it's very productive. It helps our productivity if I recognize that and I also become my own best friend. Hope that helps.